I get a lot of messages from folks who love cooking at home but feel uneasy about stepping up to a real slicer. The idea of a 12-inch blade on your countertop can sound both exciting and intimidating, especially when you've probably been using a plain kitchen knife for everything from deli meat to cheese. If you're wondering whether a manual food slicer actually saves time, delivers consistent slices, and stays within a reasonable budget, this review is going to walk through the real-world pros and cons so you can decide if it belongs in your kitchen. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the type of kitchen where a slicer makes sense. I've spent a few evenings in a small home kitchen trying to prep a charcuterie board for friends, and the manual effort of hand-cutting thin prosciutto quickly turned into a sore hand and uneven pieces. On the other hand, my neighbor who runs a catering side hustle swears by a slicer for producing uniform ham, turkey, and cheese slices in minutes. The Globe C12 Chefmate sits right in the middle of that spectrum, a countertop unit that's not industrial, but sturdy enough to handle daily slicing of meats, cheeses, veggies, and even firm breads. The motor is a 1/3 HP, 115V, 3-amp unit with overload protection and a manual reset. In practice, that means you can run it continuously for the typical batch you'd need for a family dinner without the motor tripping. I tested it by slicing a half pound of roast beef, a block of cheddar, and a few carrots back to back. The motor stayed cool, and the overload reset never had to be used. The belt drive is grooved and positively threaded, which eliminates the slip you sometimes hear in cheaper slicers when you crank the handle fast. That little detail translates into smoother operation and less fatigue on your hands. The knife itself is where most of the performance lives. Globe uses a hard-chromed, special alloy hollow ground blade that promises a long edge life. I ran the knife through a soft brie and a firm turkey breast. The brie came off in delicate ribbons, while the turkey retained a clean, uniform thickness without tearing. The top-mounted all-metal knife sharpener is a practical addition. You can touch up the edge without having to pull out a separate sharpening stone. For someone who isn't a professional knife sharper, that's a genuine time saver. Now, who should actually buy the C12? If you regularly prepare large platters for gatherings, run a small food service operation, or just love the idea of perfectly even slices for sandwich making, the slicer pays for itself in consistency and speed. It shines when you need to slice a loaf of sourdough thin enough for crostini or when you're shaving Parmesan for a pasta topping. The 12-inch width accommodates most deli-size blocks, so you won't be forced to pre-cut into smaller pieces just to fit the blade. On the flip side, if you're a solo cook who only slices a few pieces a week, you might find the countertop footprint roughly a foot wide and a little under a foot deep a bit generous for a kitchen that's already tight on space. The unit also relies on a hand crank, which means you still need to put in a little muscle. For those who expected a push-button, electric model, the manual operation could feel like a step back. Additionally, while the motor is robust for home use, it's not designed for high-volume, 8-hour shifts like a deli slicer would handle. If you plan to run it non-stop for a banquet, you'll likely need a commercial-grade unit. A practical weakness I noticed is the safety guard. It's solid, but the opening where the blade emerges is just wide enough for most items, which can be a tad restrictive when you're trying to slice irregularly shaped vegetables like zucchini or a large roast. You have to angle the product carefully, and that extra maneuvering can slow you down compared to a slicer with a wider feed. It's not a safety issue, the guard still protects your fingers, but it does affect ergonomics for larger items. Another subtle trade-off is cleaning. The metal housing and removable blade make it straightforward to wipe down, but the belt drive housing can collect crumbs if you're slicing bread or moist items. I found that a quick brush with a dry pastry brush after each use kept it from building up, but it does add a small maintenance step that you won't have with a simple knife. Value for money is where the C12 really stands out. At its price point, you're getting a stainless steel frame, a hard chrome blade, motor overload protection, and an integrated sharpener, features that many competing models charge extra for. The 5-star rating from over 3,000 reviewers suggests that owners feel they're getting a reliable slice without having to shell out for a commercial-grade machine. In my own usage, The slicer paid for itself after just a handful of gatherings because I was able to serve more guests with less prep time and without the uneven slices that used to make my platters look amateur. 2.